Hi everyone, and welcome to another of the Flying Changes Mindset and Performance podcast / live Q&As. Welcome. I am thrilled this morning to welcome on board Dominic Sewell. Hi, Dominic.
Good morning.
Dominic, gosh, we've got a lot of very interesting things to cover that I've never covered with anyone before, which are things all to do with historic equitation and how horses have done so many different things over the centuries, not just the years, and how you're involved in learning more about that, teaching that, and sharing it with people. So tell us a little bit about yourself and historic equitation.
Okay, my name is Dominic Sewell. I run a company called Historic Equitation Limited, and we specialise in historical events for the heritage industry. So if you've ever gone along with your family to an English heritage property, or you visited the Tower of London or Hampton Court Palace, or you've been somewhere in Europe, you may well have seen some, for example, jousting or some 17th century classical riding displays. And it may well have been provided by my company and horses and the people that work alongside me. That encapsulates
awesome.
What
Incredible. Okay. And so that's the bit where people might have seen you doing things, which is, you know, they might have seen displays or watched something at events. What's the bit behind the scenes where it all comes from? What else do you do?
Well, alongside training and purchasing our own horses, what we're doing is using a classical dressage system that is 700 years old. People have been writing about equitation, the use and riding and application of aids for riding for centuries. And although people in the classical world may only be aware of 20th century classical riding, books on equitation go as far back as the medieval period. The greatest one being produced by the King of Portugal, Dom Duarte, in the 1430s, which is called Bem Cavalgar, or How to Ride on Every Saddle. And it's basically a thesis upon jousting and how to be a very good rider of the time. We can then leap forward into the Renaissance, and with the Renaissance, we have the art of printing books, so it's more available to more people. And we start with Federico Grisoni in the 1550s. And then into France in the beginning of the 17th century with Pluvinel, and then into England with some great writers in the Elizabethan time, such as Thomas Bedingfield, Gervase Markham, and then, of course, to the greatest of all English writers, William Cavendish, the Duke of Newcastle, who writes his great books, A New Method of Equitation, when he was in exile in France during the Civil War, and he comes back and rebuilds his beautiful riding house at Bolsover Castle. Most people are aware, I suppose, of the classical riding masters of Francois Guernier, whose system is really the basis for the Spanish riding school. And I think from there is where classical dressage really spreads its wings and comes forward. And of course, then we come to the 20th century, where we have the beautiful and excellent books of Nuno Oliveira from Portugal, as well as many others in between. So that's trying what we're encapsulating, what we're studying, and using techniques that are taught in these books that aren't brought out of any particular. You're not going to get people using mezers or terre-terres and movements like that with these advanced movements. We try and train our horses to that level and then display them in some of our events. Really, that's
wow.
Really
So that is going way beyond me. I've learned the scales of training or done my BHS training and what have you. And this is how you ride that. This is like not just back to kind of classical principles, which for some people is quite a push, but way back even to how that stuff developed.
The roots of dressage go way back into the medieval period. That essentially dressage are riding tests and techniques to train your horse for whatever you want it to do, whether that's going to be in warfare or whether you get it to move around. But dressage techniques are all about how to get the horse supple and to move quickly. So when you're thinking about counter pirouettes or demi pirouettes, half pirouettes, they're all there to be used, especially in mounting fencing. And now there are loads and lots of mounted fencing manuals from the medieval period, especially coming out of Germany. And these depict riders and how to fight on horseback with a sword. So it's all very applicable to the context of the medieval stuff that we produce as entertainment. And you know, the stories that have been entertained in films and books for hundreds of years.
Okay, so what is then, here's a question for you. You've named your company after it. We hear it banded around, particularly in a sport that I've just got involved in called working equitation. I hear it used in side saddle. I do a bit of side saddle when we talk about side saddle equitation classes. Your company's called Historical Equitation. What is equitation then?
For me, equitation is the application of riding techniques for the horse's benefit. When we say that we learn to ride, you are practicing equitation. It is the use of a horse for man's benefit, and it then comes down into many different types. We have the equitation, as you said, for side saddle. We have the working equitation sport that's come out of the Iberian Peninsula. We have historical equitation, the study of historic riding manuals. Then we have FEI eventing, FEI dressage, British dressage, pony club. All of this encapsulates equitation, riding horses, simply put.
Cool. Thank you for clarifying that, because it's something I get asked all the time. What is equitation? I'm like, just means riding, but it sounds posh.
By using an email address.
Okay, so one of the things you mentioned before, which I think is fascinating, was Cavendish.
Yeah.
And this concept of something called a riding house.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what that kind of era and these riding houses that came about, and how that relates to modern day?
Well, you know, we're all fair weather riders at some point in our lives, and some of us that get to ride indoors, it's very nice to be able to ride in whatever weather, and that applies whether we're in the 21st century or whether we're in the 16th and 17th centuries. And riding houses came about by people who were interested in architecture, and were able to build their own properties, would include a riding house where they were training their own horses. It has to be pointed out that horsemanship is one of the most important things that a gentleman could do, along with learning swordsmanship, mathematics, a little bit of politics, Greek and Latin. To be a true gentleman, you must be in control of a horse, and there's lots of philosophies around that. So when you're building your properties, you would include a riding house so you can keep your horses, especially your stallions, in there, and you can ride in whatever weather. And because you're interested in architecture as well as horsemanship, you're going to make a very pretty building for these horses. Now, the first ones that came to Britain were built by Prince Henry. Prince Henry was the little-known son of James I. Again, himself, not even a well-known king. James I inherited the English throne after Elizabeth. And Henry was kind of like this new young god. He was like a new hope for England. You know, we had this rising tide of popularity of the monarchy, and our strength as a nation was very strong at that time. So focus on military skills was quite important, and for gentlemen, developing was very important. So building a riding house, building these new fashions that were coming over from the continent, were quite important. So the first ones were built down in Richmond, in Greenwich, and then the Duke of Northumberland built one, funnily enough, just down the road from me at Castle Aspey, before the 17th century, where William Cavendish, the future Duke of Newcastle, built one at Welbeck Abbey, where his family seat was. And then as he built Bolsover Castle in the 1630s, he included another riding house there, which is also included in his book, A General System of Horsemanship, where he is pictured in the plates in the book, riding his horses at Bolsover Castle. So for us, it's very important and very exciting that we have not only the works of the Duke of Newcastle, but pictures of the Duke of Newcastle riding his horses at Bolsover Castle, which of course still exists. The riding house still exists. Displays are still put on there on on an annual basis. So it's an absolute mecca of horsemanship for anybody who's interested in this type of thing.
Wow, fabulous. And when we're allowed out again, that's definitely a place number one on my list to go and visit, to go and find out some more, and hopefully see a display or something going on there as well by yourselves. So that's kind of some of the history of equitation, and a little, just like a fraction of, where this has all come from. But tell us a little bit about your history. Where have you come from? How on earth have you ended up doing what you do today? Because it's different, it's exciting, it's, you're always evolving. We'll talk a bit more later on perhaps about how you've had to evolve and change through the pandemic as well. But what's been your background? How on earth did you get into this yourself?
Well, disappointingly, I didn't ride as a young boy. I came to horses very late in my mid-20s. By that time, I'd got into historical reenactments. And all I wanted to do was run around being a knight in a suit of armor. And I got the suit of armor. So the next logical step was to engage in some riding. At that point, I'd seen some friends of mine dress up as hussars from the Napoleonic era, but nobody was doing late medieval knights in armor, that iconic look. So a group of us got together and formed a little group. And we went off and tried to learn to ride, whilst trying to learn to ride in armor as well, which we found most difficult, because horses don't necessarily take kindly to loud, noisy bits of metal clanging around on their back. But that's how I started. It was a hobby. And once a month we'd go down to some stables just outside London and hire these film horses and bang around for 3 or 4 hours over the weekend trying to learn to ride. And at that point I realized that if I wanted to do this to any kind of success and try and look like I know what I'm doing, I need to learn to ride. So I gave up my job. I went to work for a riding school that had a little racing yard attached, and I learned from the bottom upwards. And I had a great basis in how yards work, in what not to do and what to do. And from there, I was able to move to another area of the country, buy my first horse with a small bequest from my grandfather. Thank you, Granddad. And it kind of built from there. I was lucky enough to be asked to run a livery yard where I was living, and I was able to build up a small stable of horses. And then in 2010, we were able to start the company Historic Equitation, where we started to actually get some business in putting on historical displays. By then, I'd been able to, I've been riding for quite some time, and I was able to go forward. But I was helped immeasurably at that time by the Barber family in Norfolk, who are a large, huge presence in the English working equitation scene. With Holly Barber being one of the top 6 riders in the world. And her mum Sue was always very encouraging with me. She lent me a horse called Saracen, who was a fantastic horse. And I ended up buying a horse from them, from their stallion Infinito, called Bento, who I've been jousting on and off from this day, and he's still with me today at the age of 13. So that's kind of how it started. We've expanded that from not just international jousting, and I've been so lucky to go around the whole world, onto every continent, being able to joust internationally. But then we expanded into the historical riding areas, where we were able to do displays of the Duke of Newcastle's work, or some of the Elizabethan writers' work, such as Thomas Bedingfield and Grisoni's work, and take that and form new shows. So that's kind of successful, but it was the pandemic that like everybody else, has shut us down in 2020, and we're just waiting to see how we will recover from that. And what we're doing right now is we redesignated as a riding school in December 20, and whilst we're open for 1 month, we started putting courses on for reenactors, like I was once upon a time, and even for just normal people who want to enjoy horses and come and ride horses of Iberian extraction, and get a look of just what historical riding is all about.
Awesome. Wow, what a journey, what a story. I love hearing where people have come from, and it always starts a bit like this. Well, it was a bit of a hobby.
Absolutely.
So what has been, kind of COVID aside maybe, what's been your biggest challenge along your journey to get to where you are today?
For me, I think it's is being able to look at myself as a rider and see where my shortcomings have been, and be able to, you know, suppress one's ego and go, well, I don't need to, I don't know how to do that. You know, I've got knowledge gaps in my learning. Yes, you've gone from A to F, but you've missed out C and D. And it's quite important to understand how to do C and D. Although I know you can do F, or you think you can do it well, you actually need to do C and D. So it's about putting in a lot of the basic stuff, because although I'd started training my own horses, you know, there's always somebody who knows more than you, and you can benefit from their experience from. And I've been very lucky to be able to go around the world and learn from some great people. In 2010, we were jousting in Denmark. A colleague of mine, Arne Koets, who is a huge force of nature on the continent, and we bumped into two guys that have kind of like changed our world, and that was Bent Branderup, who is well known in the classical world, but also a gentleman called Wolfgang Krischke, who for us is a beacon of knowledge in that world. And he and his wife Christine have built up this fantastic riding school of Iberian horses in Germany at the castle of Buckeberg, the town of Buckeberg in Germany. And he has been an immense fount of knowledge, encouragement and inspiration for me, alongside a gentleman that people will know in the UK called Mr. Peter Madison Greenwell, who is a well-known classical dressage trainer and a good friend of mine. And he has been a guiding light to this day in what we do. And we still ride together and do events together, but we also train together. And that's very important to me. And so it's those things, I think, that have been quite challenging, as well as raising finance for businesses, which is quite frankly very unusual. So when you're doing what I'm doing at joust, for example, the jousting at the highest level, you have to take a suit of armor. You don't buy these things off the peg. You have to research them, find a maker, have them made for you, make sure that they fit you and they are safe to use before you test them. So raising finance for that kind of thing can be quite challenging, along with, for example, buying an Iberian horse. And that in itself, bringing a horse to England from Spain or Portugal is quite an adventure in itself. And I've been lucky enough to do that several times now. So those are some of the challenges, personal and kind of like for the business. Some of the ones that sometimes you have to sit down and go, where we're going to go with this, because I'm not quite sure that it's going to work. But luckily, touch wood, a lot of wood, we've been successful to this day, and we will recover to be able to go out and do those events again.
Okay, cool. So what therefore are some of the assumptions that are made either about the sport, and I know you do various different bits of the sport, there's not just one element to it, but what are some of the main assumptions that are made about that you've found along that way?
Well, I think people, when you talk about jousting, a lot of people don't really understand what it's like. I mean, a lot of people say to me, oh, I'd love to try jousting. And that in itself, that sentence tells me, well, you haven't really understood quite what it's about. Because if you want to go and joust, I ride a horse in a suit of armor, that itself is a journey. It's itself then to learn the techniques of how to break a lance on another person in the competition. We have to remember that true jousting is a martial art, and that takes a lot of dedication, just like any riding discipline. And I think people often misunderstand what the reasons are, or don't even take it seriously, that this, amongst the practitioners, it's taking to ask any horse to do anything that it may not want to do. And, you know, and as I said earlier, sorry about that, my Siri's just kicked in. As I said earlier, asking horses to undertake these things can be quite a challenge.
Yeah, and I think we see the spectacle of it if we get to go and watch it live, and we see it looks fantastic, and it looks quite simple. It looks like they're basically just riding along in a straight line and hitting people, doesn't it? But there must be an awful lot of skill that sits behind that, even without the armour element of it.
Well, for example, what the first thing you've got to do when you're on a tilt rail, if you're going to do it correctly, you've got to be able to ride in a counter canter. Not true canter. You know, if you're riding a normal riding school, and so we said, "Oh, right, true canter, please." You're going to be riding off the wall with a, for example, a right leg lead. With us, we're riding down for 15th century jousting. And here we go. I mean, there are so many different types of jousting from different areas that we could be here all morning talking about it. But for example, going back to my point, riding in counter-counter, you're passing your opponent left to left. The lance goes over the horse's neck. So you're striking left to left because you're all right-handed, because as most people were using a weapon in the medieval period, you're right-handed. So that's how the sport has evolved. So therefore, you have to ride counter-counter straight away to be able to have the horse in the correct balance for what you want to do. You also have to go from a stand, transition from halt into canter, and then go from canter probably into a really extended canter, so you've got the speed to be able to break the lance as you want it and be able to hold the lance. You want the horse to be running as fairly flat as possible, to be able to use the lance safely and in a technique you know where it will break it. Breaking of the lance is what gains you points. Points accrued at the end of the day is who wins at the end of the day. So that is the competitive historical jousting. Of course, there are many different examples of where we do displays with lighter lances or things, displays where we can just show the techniques of how it's used. So it's a complex sport, and as you say, but it looks very simple to begin with. But there's a lot of detail in there and a lot of techniques to get right to do it properly.
And I think that's the beauty of any sport, isn't it? If we watch any of our masters in any, especially in equine sport, it just looks like they're not really doing anything. It looks really easy. It's simple, and yet it's so difficult to master. I mean, we look at classical dressage. If we look at some of the absolute masters of it, they just look like they're sitting there, don't they? It's so refined. It's absolutely beautiful. And I think that's the thing with any of this, isn't it? That we can watch masters of their art doing it and think, oh, I want to go at that. That looks easy. But at that moment, we don't know what we don't know. So we have no idea how much complexity there is behind it. Exactly. How do you find that relates into riding generally and the people that you get to teach and work with and do stuff with?
Well, I think that's a hugely important point that you're saying, is that we are inspired by these people that make it look effortless. But we all know that most riding it actually takes a great deal of knowledge and understanding of a horse. Now, we've all heard people have overhorsed themselves in the past. You buy a horse, but you just can't ride one side of it because you haven't been given the techniques or you haven't engaged in enough training to do that. So I think it's very important that while we can be inspired by these great people, that we have to go and seek the knowledge and get trained properly, so we can make sure that we are getting what we want out of our sport or our discipline, and do it safely to the best of our abilities.
And so with that in mind, then, how do you go about setting goals or setting what it is that you want to achieve either in your riding or your business? How do you go about deciding where you want to go and what you want to do?
Well, I think there's personal goals, there's goals for the business, there's goals that I set for the people that work with me. Well, I'm very lucky at the moment that I'm able to attract people, like-minded people that want to come and work for the company, and so I can set goals in their riding ability and what they can achieve. So, for example, to be able to come and perform in a show. Here we go. And I'm very lucky to have a very dedicated group of people that work alongside me. For personal goals, I'm always going to be, I'm always running to catch up because, I missed a lot of stuff. Looking at my technique, I'm constantly going back to basics with my horses to try and make sure that the foundations are strong for the stuff that's going on later. For business, as we've said before, it's been a big challenge. So redesignating as a riding school has been, slightly scary because I've never engaged that much in teaching before. Turns out I really, really enjoy it, and people, I really get buzz off the enthusiasm that people come when they get off one of the horses and go, oh, that was fantastic. I couldn't believe it. No, because the first time they've ridden a schoolmaster and they've experienced what it feels like to sit when it's doing a piaffe or a passage, or even if they want to do something a little bit elevated, but just getting people to feel what a collected horse is like is fantastic. Because I remember not too long ago when I was first sat on an Iberian and going, wow, this thing like feels like it's going to explode, but it feels fantastic. And I always try and keep those early memories in mind when I'm teaching, and when I'm setting goals for people. Setting goals for the business, I suppose, is about persuading people how we can benefit from what we do, because a lot of our stuff is educational on so many different levels. What I enjoy doing with the company is that we've been able to take jousting into an urban environment. You know, we've never been at country shows. You'll see us at castles and heritage sites. But what I've enjoyed doing is going into city centres, and being influenced by some of the things that we've done. For example, jousts in the city town centres in Denmark, where they shut everything down and put on this great medieval display. And we were able to go back into Peterborough in 2015 and do that at their Heritage Festival, where they shut the place down. We put down a surface, we built a tilt rail, and we jousted in front of Peterborough Cathedral. It was absolutely astonishing achievement for the council and ourselves to do together, but we did that. And unfortunately, we were going to do that in London, hopefully this year, but unfortunately, because of COVID, stopped, because we were going to celebrate the reopening, the rebuilding of Smithfield Market, which is going to soon be a new museum space for the Museum of London. And if people don't know, Smithfield was traditionally the place where jousts were held in London in the medieval period, and there's lots of exciting stories about some of the jousts that happened there. So expanding my business beyond what's expected of it is what I find exciting. Taking events to places where you would not normally expect them to is quite exciting. But also trying to explain to people that we are not just some kind of, we're not just a sideshow, that people can see that we're taking our riding and the training of our horses to quite a high level. And that's kind of like what pleases me, and how in the platforms like this, I'm very grateful to be able to talk to people about what we do, how we do it, and the level of riding required to do it.
Okay, so loads going on, loads of incredible opportunities, and more to come, no doubt. We're just kind of sitting in a holding pattern right now. It'll happen.
Yes.
What would you say your 3 biggest life lessons have been in this journey, for want of a better word, that you've been on to get to where you are now and want to go forwards with?
Learning patience. I think learning patience in whatever you're trying to achieve, especially with training horses, hugely important. When I first started training horses, I went to be quick, do this, do that, do that. Whoa, they're doing it. Why can't you do it? I felt a lot of personal pressure on trying to train it. But now, through education from other people, I've been able to back that off over the years and take the horses' learning progression at the same time. That's been important, and I've been able to apply that to lots of different things of how I train my team and how people come and learn to ride here, come about that, but also feedback from them, listening to people, learning people's learning styles, which are all often quite different. Some people, as you know about learning styles, some are visual, some people are audible. There's lots of different techniques to actually try and get the best out of a pupil-teacher relationship, and really just I suppose for me, the last thing I've learned is just how much I love reading and delving into history, and how much information there is there that is still absolutely relevant to present day. What was being written in the 15th century is absolutely relevant to the 21st century and anybody that wants to sit on a horse.
Yeah, and I suppose if we think about it, although the sport might have changed, what people are looking for might have changed, the way that we're the tack and the kit and the all the different kit really that has changed. Actually, horses haven't. Over those horses they might look slightly different to how they used to, but mostly that's because of training methods and things and breeding. But they're essentially the same, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean the horse hasn't changed really since we've evolved as human beings. Yes, the sizes have increased, but that's due to the human intervention. But since the Greeks have been riding horses, they started off riding 12-hand, 13-hand horses. But it's the human intervention that's created some of the great breeds. You know, we bred the great riding horse of the 16th and 17th centuries. We invented the thoroughbred horse. We invented breeds like the Neapolitan, which are now extinct and aren't used at all because those horses aren't required for mounted warfare anymore. So yeah, I mean, but things such as tack and whatever, and things change from discipline to discipline, and it's kind of interesting how that all evolves. Really, it's kind of what you need for this and what you need for that and that. But that, of course, so that's also business driven, and we must always be mindful of that. That, you know, breeds of horses, people selling saddles, people fitting saddles, people just selling bridles. It's business driven because it's what people appeals to people, but also it's what required for certain disciplines, and I think that's all quite important. Really, is that, you know, we are part of a global economy and business, and it's important to have the right stuff for the right job.
So talking about stuff then and kit. So obviously, if you're going to be jousting, you've got quite serious bits of kit there with, you know, your armor and your lances and all that kind of thing. What is actually the tack like that you use for jousting? What's it similar to? Do you still use like truly historical stuff, or is there a more modern day twist?
Well, no, we build historical saddles. So just like you have a purpose-built saddle for a horse, you know, we'll take a mold of a horse's back, and there are some very good saddle tree makers who have evolved to make specifically historic saddles. So and they can be created quite easily. They're built from wood. The pads are normally stuffed with wool, just like a normal saddler would do, and a normal saddler, saddle fitter, will be able to adjust those pads as they settle down within the saddle, like you would do with a modern saddle. After 6 months, you know that you need to either get the pommel built up, or maybe you need a little bit of padding in the middle just to flesh it out again, so it sits nicely upon the horse's back. So within the historical community, there are these little industries building historical saddles to do the job. Not only to do the job for the horse's benefit, but also to make sure that it looks historic and that you're part of a system. You know, if you're wearing a completely copied 15th century style of armor, then you want to have a 15th century style of saddle, and the bardings, and the trappings, and the bits, and the bridles that all go with it. You know, it's all very, very important to be able to make sure that it looks correct, but it's also part of a system, because the saddle's got to fit the horse, the saddle's got to fit the man, and the armor in one. It all fits into one. So like a whole little weapon system going on there. So it's quite a complicated system to get right. But when it does, it can look absolutely spectacular, and you can make it as rich and as fine as the paintings or the manuscripts that you modeled the original stuff off. But of course, it's expensive. There's no question.
Yes, you can't really go, you know, online and buy it from your local tack store, can you?
No,
So
do it correctly.
I think the other bit that people love about jousting is the spectacle of it. And I mean, even just looking behind you in that little bit of a picture, you can see all the banners and the flags and the bunting. I don't know all the special names for it from a historical point of view, but one of the gorgeous things I love about particularly when you watch jousting, when you watch the historical stuff, is the beautiful I don't know what you call it, clothing that the horse is in. You know, the lovely, I don't even know what you call them.
The blankets that cover the horses are caparisons, and are called caparisons. Originally were evolved so you could recognize who is who, because when you're wearing armor, your face is covered, nobody knows who it is. So you would this is the beginnings of heraldry, and then you would decorate your horse either in your own heraldic caparison or something that was a theme to the event. Many of jousts had themes. You know, they were all quite often had a theme about love, or an ancient story about Greeks, or the Greeks versus wild men and capturing Romans. So lots and lots of characters that came in to make these thematic jousts happen, and that evolves over time, from the early jousts just being a very quite brutal mock battle, to something that is very specifically staged. For example, joust over Elizabeth I on Ascension Days in England, where people were arriving, jousters appearing from carts pulled by elephants and riding like that, or jousters appearing completely bedecked in gilded armor and clothes, just ridiculous amounts of money, spending much more money than, for example, Formula One would today. But, it was about showing off. It was about showing how rich you were, but also along with that, you still had to be able to show that you were still a skillful horseman and jouster, and they showed off how powerful you are. And many riding manuals of the 16th and 17th centuries say, well, if you can ride a powerful horse like this, the great horse, then you will be able to command people, and if you can command people, then you can command a country or an empire. It was all so horsemanship always had this very symbolic meaning about how you could become a more powerful person and advance yourselves. And but display is very, very important to jousters and people who are interested in the historical artifacts, as I am and many of my colleagues are. It's quite important to get those things right and copy these beautiful things, because at the end of the day, we are all massive nerds.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting that idea. But I think it's important, if it's whatever's important to you, if you want to do something that is historically accurate, then you're going to need to know that detail, aren't you? And there's going to either be someone that knows that that's not, or there's going to be the people that don't understand it but just enjoy the spectacle and love to watch it. I wouldn't have a clue if something was historically accurate or not, but I'd enjoy watching the spectacle a bit. But it just depends on who your audience is and why you're doing it and that side of things. So what is it then that really does drive you to do it in a historically accurate way and in a way that's reenactment as opposed to theatre?
Again, I think it's about being historically correct. As turning out to become an historian, it's very important for us when we're working for organisations in the heritage industry who expect a high level of authenticity. And I say it's that thing that excites us. It excites me to go and look in a museum and see how armour really was, how it was made, or the excitement I get when I get a new book, say on horsemanship, and start to delve into it and look at the pictures. It's that kind of heightened excitement that we get to make sure things look great, and having things correctly made for you is just exciting for me. And you command that alongside what we're doing with the horses and the types of horses we're using. Very much demands a high level of ability and knowledge to achieve it. So combining the two things is kind of like what we're doing. We're breaking ground that wasn't broken 20 years ago when I first started. We're advancing that, and that might only be very interesting to a small amount of people, but on a larger scale for the displays, after 10 years of running my business and having crowds of 5,000 or 6,000 people per day at shows, I know it's popular to a wider interest of people who are interested in history, because frankly, if people weren't interested in history, they wouldn't be at that particular castle watching that particular event. So to us, we enjoy sharing our knowledge with those people who are genuinely interested in what we're doing, and that's why we are such a small niche part of the horse industry, I suppose, for want of a better word.
And so I've got so many questions now about the different types of horses and females and all sorts of things. But just really quickly, you talk about being historically accurate rather than just about the spectacle, and that you work with, historic organisations, and so that's really important. What about, do you ever do film work? Do you get asked to do that, and is that something that you would ever do? Because presumably, well, I know that for film, it doesn't necessarily have to be historically accurate. It just has to work on film or television. And those of us that know anything about bits and pieces sit there going, "Oh, they wouldn't have done that. That's not correct." All that kind of thing. And I know, like, a tiny bit. I'll watch Downton Abbey side saddle or something and go, "Oh, they wouldn't have been wearing that in those days." But do you ever get asked to do that sort of thing?
Film work, no. Film work, there are a number of companies who specifically do film work in the UK. They're large companies that are very, very long established, have huge amounts of horses and riders on their books. And I'm always very happy to be another one of those, because when we're talking about film and some TV drama, You know, you're telling a story. Things don't need to be historically accurate. And quite frankly, if you're going to be the bloke in the corner going, oh, that's not right, this is right, people are going to tell you to, you know, get your coat, because really they're just telling a story. The director's not, you know, interested if they didn't have that button in 1795. It doesn't matter. Historical documentaries on TV, I do a fair amount of, because people are looking for historical knowledge and correct stuff. So I'm quite happy to do that. Film stuff's great, but you know, I would love to do more, but I never have the time. But there's a lot of
it does take a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, what I'm saying is what I do to film isn't relevant. I know it's fun. It's not relevant, and I don't get upset about it. It's just that's what the industry is. So yeah.
Cool. No, we were asked that by someone watching in, so I thought I'd better ask the question for you.
No, it's I turn up, I keep my mouth shut and do that. So, but often TV comes to us, it comes to the yard, because they're interested in what we do. So people want to learn about what Henry VIII's doing in the jousting field. Then of course I'm going to give them what I know. Cool.
Okay, so coming back to when you were talking about earlier about the types of horses that you work with, and you were talking about the Iberian horses and things like that. So, you know, obviously our modern day leisure horses are very different to what they would have been way back when. And even the Iberian horses are slightly different, even in the modern Iberian, to what it would have been back in the day. What kind of horses would they have used in jousting in the UK, for instance, back in, I don't know, whenever?
The first thing I need to do is dispel the myth of the Shire horse. This is the first one that people assume, oh, well, they're carrying lots of extra armor. That's a lot of extra weight. So they must have only used Shire horses, which is absolutely ridiculous. That's like Lewis Hamilton turning up to an F1 race in a tractor, because that's what a Shire horse is. It's a tractor. It's used for pulling the land, pulling harness, and pulling equipment. Iberian horses have been imported into England since the 11th century. We've got loads and loads of records for them, and therefore, because Iberian horses are much less changed over centuries. Okay, much recently they're obviously being bred for sports. Horses and dressage, FEI dressage, whatever. But generally, the old types of Lusitanos, the old types of Cartojano and PREs are still there and still being bred. You know, they're remaining in their sizes. The sizes aren't going much above 15.3, 16 hands max. We don't find horses any bigger than that, mostly in the medieval period before the 16th century. So that's why we're looking at using those horses. Of course, that means that you also have to have an extra responsibility of learning the skills to ride those types of horses. Some heavy horses have been used in modern jousts. Frisians, for example, are quite popular. And for example, I do have a part-bred Lusitano Frisian horse, who is, I think, regarded now as a new breed called a Warlander. There's a Warlander world breed stud that's coming out, where people are mixing slightly heavier Frisian horses and Iberians, mostly PRE Iberian crosses, but as I said, there are Lusitano ones as well, which I'm very lucky to have a very good example. So these are the types of horses that we're using, but again, just like any sport, you can use whatever horse is able to do the job. It doesn't have to be these type of high level horses. But that is what is the most popular, because that's what was used at the time. And certainly in Europe, my colleagues in Germany, Lusitanos and Spanish horses, hugely popular. That goes to the same people in Scandinavia, and of course down into France, where again there's always been a strong relationship between the Iberian horses and riders in France. That's what we're looking at historically correctly, but it doesn't mean that you can't use any horses at all. You can use whatever breed of horse you want. You know, it doesn't really matter. But if you want to be historical, that's what was used.
It's really interesting, because I would have thought, you know, like being so close to Ireland as we are, that the more kind of draft types and things would have been used because of the proximity. But you're saying actually they would have come over from the continent, and you know, in the pictures they don't really sort of look like those kind of horses. I suppose back then they looked a lot finer, but they weren't jousting, were they? They were being used for other kinds of riding and things, weren't they?
Well, you would have many different types of horses. If you were a gentleman or a knight, you're going to have quite a few different horses. You would have your destrier, which is your war horse or your jousting horse, which is used for heavy armor, could be quite an aggressive stallion. Your traveling horse would be called a palfrey, and that would be a fine, light limbed, possibly an Iberian horse or a finer horse that is comfortable to ride over distances. If your wife is with you, she could be riding side saddle on an ambling horse. Now, an ambling horse is a horse where the legs, the rear leg and the foreleg move together, kind of like the tolt of the Norwegian horses, and that is a very comfortable way of getting about. Or you'd have a courser, which is what you'd probably use for hunting and that type of thing. So not the kind of horse that you would want to damage jumping over hedges and things or going through woodland. You don't want to damage your destrier doing that, so you'd use your courser for that, your palfrey for your fine travelling horse, an ambler possibly when you're moving the whole household somewhere. So there's horses for courses. There's lots of different types, and type rather than breed is more important, because the breed and the stud books don't really start to come out until about the late 16th century, where the first ones come out, I think, for the Freeborger horses. It's one of the first stud books before we start to get to, although the established bloodlines of the Portuguese and Spanish horses are there, the stud books come out, I think, at the time of about Philip II of Spain in the Elizabethan period. So yeah, but Iberian horses very much used, and pointed out in their build in many lots and lots of painting.
Okay, and so that brings me as well onto another question I've had, which is, so you talk about, obviously it was men that were riding horses, it was men that were going to battle, therefore it was men that were jousting and things, and the ladies, if they were going to do anything, it would be a side, it would be side saddle, it would be out and about showing in the park or what have you, or it would be to travel if they weren't in a carriage or something. So now obviously women ride horses, and there's probably women that maybe want to learn to joust, but there's definitely a lot of women doing dressage, in fact probably more so than men now, actually, if we look at the statistics. What's the difference between classical riding as it was then, which was by men mostly, to how it is now with a female form and a female body? And we're not as strong, we're different. I know it's not about strength, but we biomechanically different bodies as well.
Yeah, we definitely are, but that shouldn't be what's good in the 21st century is the fact that we are able to bring men and women together in the same environment, and there's not many sports that can actually say that, where people compete at the same level together. And yes, biomechanically women are different, but that doesn't matter. We can design saddles around that, but the rules don't change. The rules aren't different for men than women at the very top level of things, and that shouldn't be for jousting. We can make adaptations for body types and sizes, but it doesn't mean that we are ruling out women being able to play on the same playing field as men. And there are women jousters, and there are some very good riders that do joust, and long may it remain that way, that we are able to combine what should have been long ago now. It should be a level playing field, and that should continue.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. I know we've only scratched the surface of your knowledge, clearly. Tell us just a little bit to finish off about how, if someone's interested, they can get in touch, or they can get involved, or they can come and see you when we're allowed out, hopefully not too soon. I will definitely be coming up to have some schoolmaster lessons on some of your gorgeous Iberian horses. That sounds amazing. But how can we get in contact with you or get involved?
Easiest place to reach out is on social media. Facebook, find the Historic Equitation page, or my personal page, Dominic Sewell. We have a website, historicequitation.com, which shows you everything that we do for events, but also a little bit on our little riding school. But yeah, we're personal. If you're interested, and we'll come back to you straight away, because we're very excited to be able to offer our services to people who are kind of interested in not just historical riding, but all types of equitation. And you mentioned that you're a side saddle rider as well. I'm very interested in side saddle from a historical point of view. I've been able to recreate a 16th century side saddle, and that's something I'll be looking forward to showing you when you come and visit.
Can't wait. As soon as they're letting us out, my diary's already filled, my lorry's ready to go, it's had everything it needs to have done. My husband's gonna be like, Bye. Because I've already warned him as soon as we're allowed out. It's been lovely spending the last year with you, darling. I've really appreciated having time together. You won't now see me for probably about 2 years. I've got so much more to go and do.
It has been unusual, hasn't it? That people like myself, possibly like you, who often work away from home for extended periods of time, have been at home with their couples and their children. And frankly, at parts, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Whether they've thoroughly enjoyed me being around the whole time, I don't know. But yes, the fingers and the feet are getting itchy, and it'll be nice to get back on the road again. I've finally got my truck MOT'd, and it'd be good to get back on the road, because I think that's been a problem for a lot of people. Is things like transport, COVID's held up people are getting MOTs. I was very lucky enough to bump into a famous eventer the other day. He said, "Oh, you go to Europe a fair bit?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, have you got your ticket for driving horses in Europe?" I was like, "Oh no." So so I've got to go pop over to Europe and get a ticket on my truck to make sure I can transport my horses through Europe. So much to do. So much. And
yes, and there's a lot of Brexit stuff that's now come in, which is going to be a bit of a nightmare actually for taking horses to Europe. There's going to be a lot of documentation and tape that needs doing, but that's another discussion for another day. But even just within the UK. So what's your biggest thing that you are looking forward to this year that you cannot wait, that fingers crossed we should be able to do? What are you really looking forward to getting out and back and doing?
I am really enjoying. I think we've got a chance of doing some events in the summer, and I think just getting the armour back on, and which we've been doing all these, the nice weekends we've been having, and just feeling that excitement again of the lance in your hand and your horse sitting down on his bum and jumping down the tilt rally, and it's all exciting. It just brings it all back what the summers used to be like. So that's kind of like where I'm at the moment. It's definitely looking ahead. Positive frame of mind, and just looking to see what we can do in the future. But yeah, it's all about something. Also, I'm just about to deliver a lecture to the English Heritage members, an online event from Bolsover Castle with a horse display, which we should be doing in a couple of weeks' time, and hopefully we'll be online a little time after that.
Oh, great. So if anyone wants to get involved in that, they need to become a member of English Heritage, is that right?
Well, hopefully it'll go out to the members first, and then with the best one in the world, make that available online so people can understand, so people can see it and learn about it, and hopefully when people have been listening to this podcast, pop up there, because it's a fantastic place. Yeah,
definitely. Well, thank you so much, Dominic. It's been absolutely fascinating. People have said thank you so much for sharing. It's really interesting, and your horses look amazing. So I'm sure lots of people will be in touch about how they can come and get involved and learn some more, or just watch things and learn some more about the origins of it. I'm absolutely fascinated. I'm going to go and find some good books now to start having a look into it, especially to help with my working equitation journey and all the learning that I've got to do to get even better at that side of things now as well.
Yeah, well, so the Portuguese Royal School, they've got some fantastic clips on YouTube of, if you want to see horses working calmly and quietly but yet beautifully. I think there's one called Morning Training. It's about an hour long. Just fantastic. Really, really inspiring for everybody. But thank you for the opportunity. Really enjoyed talking to you, Jenny. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you and everybody else soon.
Yeah, cool. Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.